the way I look at life is that it's the most important phenomenon that exists in the universe. Without life, the universe is by definition meaningless. It's clearly meaning enters the universe with consciousness, and consciousness is a property of living things. And so without living things, there's no meaning. So I think that let's flip it round. If this is the only planet in the Milky Way galaxy that currently hosts an intelligent civilization, then it's the only island of meaning in a sea of 400 billion stars. And therefore, we have a tremendous responsibility, notwithstanding our physical insignificance, to protect this island of meaning.
Dr. Brian Cox is one of the most popular science communicators in the world. Full stop. If you've never heard of Brian Cox, you might need to get your nerd card revoked. He's been hailed as the natural successor to David Attenborough as the foremost science communicator in England, and his BBC specials are some of the most popular science programs they've ever aired in the last decade. Some of those programs include Wonders of the Solar System, Wonders of the Universe, and Wonders of Life, as well as some of the books that he's written like The Quantum Universe and Why Does E = MC Squared. All of this is outside his day job as a professor of particle physics at the University of Manchester, and he's been the recipient of multiple prestigious awards, including the Michael Faraday Prize. He's been elected a Fellow of the Royal Society, and he's been named a Commander of the Order of the British Empire, which, in my head, I imagine is presented in a ceremony with a sword of some kind. And yet, despite all that, he was generous enough to spend some time with me talking about everything from the origin of life to life on other planets, cosmology, and his upcoming live tour called Horizons: A 21st Century Space Odyssey, which will employ some groundbreaking visual effects techniques that were actually pioneered on shows like The Mandalorian, which is really cool. The tour kicks off in the US and Canada at the end of April and will hit the UK and Ireland at the end of August. I'll put a link to some of the dates in the show notes below. But he's hitting up 50 cities on this tour. That's just that's insane. This guy's a total rock star. And he used to actually be a rock star. We talked about that just a little bit. You don't get much cooler than Dr. Brian Cox. All that said, it was kind of surreal to get a chance to talk to him. I really don't share on Facebook with my friends very often what I've got going on with my YouTube stuff anymore, but this was definitely one of those where, I took a screenshot of our Zoom call and shared it. I couldn't help myself, and I don't think my friends like me anymore. But anyway, fascinating conversation. I really enjoyed it, and I want to thank Brian and his team for setting this up. I'm super honored to get to do this, but enough of that. Let's jump into my conversation with Dr. Brian Cox. Have you started the tour yet?
No, we've done some sort of a lot of warm-up shows in the UK because the tour is tremendously complicated to the horror of everybody who has to pay for it. Right, so all the promoters, what are you doing? Because, for example, we've been working with Epic Games, so with Unreal, to build virtual worlds. So we have a planetscape which is all generated in real time on the stage. And so you can shine lights into it. And if I move around, we have some AI bot things that can interact with me and follow me around on the stage. Uh-huh. And of course, all that is really complicated and stupid. I mean, I think when I said to my, when people cost it out, they say, oh, this science guy is going to go and give a talk. He just needs an overhead projector or something. Those things you used to write the thing. Hello, I'm going to talk about the universe. Yeah, and so they cost it all out, and then I go, no, actually, I want 30-meter wide LED screens, virtual worlds created. The intro video is, I spoke to a friend of mine who is a conductor, an orchestral conductor, and I said to him, what should Stanley Kubrick have used in 2001 for the music? Where did Stanley go wrong in 2001? And he immediately said he should have used this piece of music by Sibelius. Sibelius' Fifth Symphony, the third movement, it was written in 1915, and it's this beautiful piece of music. And it's at one level, it's about swans taking off from a lake, but at another level, it's about the deep beauty and coherence of nature, right? The deep majesty of nature. And it sounds like every science fiction film you've ever heard. It was from 1915 and everybody's ripped it off ever since. It's a beautiful thing. So I basically remade 2001 in 8 minutes to this piece of music, which is how the show opens.
Cool.
And of course, that actually probably per minute cost more than 2001. so it's quite an ambitious. It's my friend Robin Ince, who's a comedian who comes with me to lighten things up a bit. I sort of say sometimes, thank you for coming to this thing. It's and he always says, yes, it's a show though. It's not a lecture at these prices.
Right.
So it's got to be redefined as a show, but it is a show. So
it's on like a giant screen behind you, isn't it?
Yeah, LED. Yeah, and we put as much as we can into the venues. So however much we can fit into each venue, we put in. It's like Lego LED screens. You can just build them.
Just stack them on top of each other.
Yeah.
It makes me think a little bit of like how they shoot, a lot of things now, but I think The Mandalorian was the first one where instead of using a green screen or a blue screen, they have a giant LED backdrop that kind of like interacts with the camera movement and everything.
That's it, using Unreal, which is what we've done on the live show.
So you're just doing a live version of that.
Live version of Mandalorian. Yeah.
Yeah.
We can
back to lightsabers. I was also, when you were talking about 2001, I was like, do you have a stage that rotates where you can like walk in a circle and it looks like you're
my promoter is can we do that? Can we have a rotating stage?
Last minute edition.
Like I'm in a space station. He says, yeah.
Just throw it together.
So we're on.
I'm calling the production company now.
Oh, yeah. Good idea. We'll we'll see. Yeah, see how much money we can lose.
Thanks, Joe. Yeah. So, so you're still working out some kinks and some bugs and getting it all figured out and stuff.
Yeah, I mean it does. It does actually change as well over because it's not really scripted. Because it is obviously I know what I'm going to talk about, but I do like to get distracted because
sure.
For example, I'm doing a lot of work on black holes at the moment. I'm writing a book on black holes, but also I have a part of the PhD student that I'm co-supervising who's working on black holes. And so it is possible and likely that during the section where I talk about black holes, I'm going to go off on a tangent. We have actually a black hole that in graphics that a company called DNEG did for us, so they did the black hole in Interstellar.
Oh, right.
And they,
with Leonard Susskind, right?
Kip Thorne.
Kip Thorne. Oh,
so it's Kip's code, but which has been published actually. So working with DNEG, so we use that code, and it's great because everything that you see in those simulations it is a simulation. It's using Einstein's general relativity, no kind of artistic license really, other than the way you construct the so-called accretion disk around it.
Right.
So I can talk to it. Because it's there behind me, and we orbit around it in the view that we did. So you can see all the way the stars shift around it as you orbit, or the images of the stars. It's spectacular, actually.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
And I think, like, I wonder, because I know that one of the things about that sort of, I keep forgetting the name of it, but that we were talking about with Mandalorian, as an actor, it's something you can play off of and get, emotion from. You're not just looking at a blue screen or something. You're actually looking at the thing and reacting to it. I bet you get a little bit of that too. Just kind of like
you can
more presence, I guess.
And as we're playing with it, the interesting thing is you can change camera angles from the lighting desk, right, on your graphics. So traditionally with graphics, with TV graphics or film graphics, you have to render them and that's it. So you have to determine everything ahead of time. And if you want to change a camera move, you've got to re-render it, and it's tens of thousands or $100,000 or something to redo it. But with the using those technologies, you can just go one night. You can go, actually, it'd be nice to go a little bit closer to that city in the distance. So let's just move the camera in. Or you can change the lens. You can go wide angle or narrow angle, change the lighting state, let the sun set. It's really fascinating, actually, the way that you can play with it.
Yeah. I actually went to school for film and TV about 50 lifetimes ago, but it's funny how much it's changed since then. Like even when I was learning, we had I was cutting actual film on what they called a Steenbeck, like the reel-to-reel kind of thing, like my grandpa would have done, and of course all the kids did here. Like seriously. But even like while I was there, non-linear editing became a thing, like computer editing and Premiere and Final Cut Pro and all that. And now they have like, you can just build whole worlds and interact with them in real time. It's just, it's
and
amazing.
we do, the shows, because at the end, you'll see it has a kind of we run some credits over this world. It's just like a bit of a movie ending.
Mm-hmm.
And I do sometimes. We'll look at the credits and I can change them every night, so I can add different people in. I could put the name of the theatre in and just re-render it. Because the laptops are powerful enough now. Even though for a film geek like you, our resolution is 8,000 by 2,000 pixels, which is because it's a very wide aspect and a lot of pixels. Yeah. But for the real geeks, it turns out that I'm not going to advertise. I can advertise. I don't care. I didn't get them for free. I bought them, but I bought one of the new M1 Max, and it really does actually render quickly out of Premiere. So there you go. And I promise you, I have no sponsorship from Apple. I'm just telling you that it's capable of doing that in a reasonable amount of time.
Yeah, I'm waiting for the new Mac Pros with those. That's what I've been
probably
be able to bend space time with it. No, it's funny because like when I was in college, they still the school didn't have nonlinear editing yet, but there was one guy that had a hard drive big enough to handle video, and people were literally paying him to learn how to edit on his computer. It was a 13 gigabyte hard drive.
Yeah.
And we were like, there's never going to be a bigger hard drive than that. That's insane,
Yeah.
It's just funny.
My first PC had a 40 megabyte hard drive. I remember it so vividly.
Mm-hmm.
40 megabytes.
And it filled a room.
It was
maybe not that far.
It was quite
back.
a big, slow thing. It was,
yeah.
It was interesting actually. I was at JPL. We were just. It's one of the reasons I'm here in California.
Mm.
We've been making a little film following Perseverance, the rover across the surface of Mars.
Mm-hmm.
And when you talk about the technology that's in Perseverance, the rover, it's impressive at one level, but it's extremely slow, because they have to be radiation hard electronics, and so these processors are 1990s processors. I think they're 130 megahertz processors.
Wow.
Remember that? I mean, when did you last have a computer that was 130 megahertz? The point is, it doesn't crash, so it can survive on the surface of Mars with the radiation and so on. So it's very reliable. But they're so far, back in terms of computing power, and it drives itself. It's an incredible machine. It drives itself autonomously across the surface of Mars using a processor that you would have probably been, like you said, editing video on 15 years ago or 20 years ago.
How much of that, though, is for the radiation reasons and the safety reasons, and how much was just because they started working on it a long time ago?
No, it is the electronics, because the helicopter on Mars, Ingenuity, that thing is way more powerful than the rover, because it didn't have to be spec'd to the highest space standards, because it's an engineering test. So it's basically a couple of mobile phones. And it wipes the floor with the rover, because it has to, because it's a drone that has to fly itself, and that's hard. A lot of processing. So it's interesting. So if you could just stick a couple of phones in the things, they'd have far more intelligence. But of course, you zap it with a cosmic ray and it breaks.
Wow.
Basically.
That's funny. I was actually just working on a video about the South Atlantic anomaly, and how there's some satellites that have gone through and had, what do they call them? Single
event upset.
Single event upset. Yeah. Thank you. I knew it was like SEU, but I couldn't remember what it stood for. But anyway, so it's just a weird little thing. We just kind of touched on the same thing there. So this tour, when does it start?
So it starts at the end of April.
Okay.
What is the first date?
April
22nd in DC,
Mm-hmm.
and then comes to Philadelphia, New York, Boston just after that, and then head off across the states, going to some places I've never been before, and we end up in the end of June in Texas.
So that's where I am. I'm in Dallas. I know
we'll be in Dallas.
Point.
When are we in Dallas? I see no one. My people do not have the... I haven't got people. That's why I'm actually pretending for the viewers that there's no one in here.
There's nobody.
I'm just trying to be grand and.
June 23rd.
June 23rd.
Okay.
June 23rd in Dallas.
June,
the last time I was in Dallas was when I was in my band, D-Ream, a band that I was in the 90s, and we played a little gig somewhere called the Lizard Lounge.
Yeah.
Is it still there?
I don't think so. I think it shut down not too long ago.
Yeah. So that's the last time I was in Dallas. It must have been like 1993 or something. So
Okay, so you know what? That answered my question. I was going to ask if you had done tours before. Like, because I've never done anything like that. I've been kind of dipping my toe into thinking about doing live stuff just to sort of support the channel and whatnot. But the idea of just going on a tour and just traveling and having a whole group of people, it sounds fun, but it also sounds grueling. It's like a whole lifestyle, sort of.
It is. I mean, and I have. So I've done really big tours in UK, Australia, New Zealand, those places. And we also did one big US tour, actually, but in smaller venues about 3 years ago. So I like it. I mean, I enjoy it. I try to do it in an enjoyable way. So I don't do anything else, which is nice because I've always got so many things going on, with at the university and all the things that I do. So in some sense, it's quite good to just go, okay, all I have to do is be awake from 7:30 till 10 or whatever. So that's it. The whole day is that, and the rest of it is just focused on that. Yeah,
that's almost
so
It's like clarifying. You don't have to. You're not as scattered. You have this one thing you're kind of focusing on.
But in the UK, it's kind of a bigger thing. I mean, we play, arenas, so they're 15,000 seat venues.
Good Lord.
So wow. I think it's rock and roll. We've got 4 trucks and 2 tour buses and a crew of 25 or something like that. So, and the great thing about the US tour is, although we're in smaller venues, all the production is that production. So it's an arena production. Squashed into a theatre, which you wouldn't normally do because you couldn't do that. You couldn't have all these fancy video effects and things if you were playing 1,000 seat places. But because in the UK I can play 15,000 seat places, I can create these these things, which is fun.
Wow. But what is it? I mean, you get up, you probably have a day or two in the city, whatever city you're in, or is it just like that day?
It's often just one day.
Yeah.
So, So
you just hang out at the hotel, or do you try to get out and explore? Or
I do. I like to. I'm not very rock and roll anymore. So if you go back to the 90s, then yes, I would. After the show, I'd go out and go to bed at 4 a.m, and sleep till the next show. Now I don't. I go to bed straight after the show, and then I get up and exercise, which I like to do. So what I do is I see the city, because I go for a run and try and find a nice park or something, or down by a river if there's a river there, and find a place to exercise. So I'm really boring now, but I get to see the cities. Whereas, when I was in my band, I wouldn't do anything. Basically, I just.
And do you have like family that comes with you or anything? I mean, if you're gone for months at a time.
No, we actually arrange it so that it's outside of school holidays. So school holidays, I stay at home or go on holiday. So I don't work when the family are available. Basically,
that makes sense.
That's the way I do it.
My wife's a teacher, so we don't have kids, but I still have to like schedule around school stuff.
Yeah.
I'm still on a semester schedule myself.
Yeah.
When it comes to travel and stuff. Well, that's really cool. Like I said, I've never really been on a tour, and I think about musicians that go off and do that and just kind of have to, I mean, traveling is fun, but it can also be really grueling. And you hear all those old, songs from like Motley Crue about like on the road and, living the life on the road and stuff. And it sounds fun, but it also sounds like an ordeal. But
I think they just made it up though, Motley Crue. I think they were just like doing what I do. They're going to bed straight after the show. I think that they were, just going home if they could. And I think it was just all a fantasy in their own minds.
Maybe after a certain point. Maybe in their younger days they were partying all night.
No, I'm sure they were. I'm just making it up. I have no idea what Motley Crue got up to. I
don't think I want to know. There's probably some books out there about that. So you get to talk about science all the time. I thought I would give you a chance to talk about something that's not science for once.
Well, no, there's nothing. I if you want to challenge me, I will turn it into science. So there you go. I've taken the challenge.
No matter what it is, you'll turn it into science.
I'll turn it into science.
Well, no, I wasn't going to ask you about anything specific. I was just going to see if, like, I like to ask people, what rabbit holes have you gone down recently? Like what movies might you be watching, or TV show, or books, or just like what's just something outside of what you're always talking about that you're like into these days?
It's a good question, because what I tend to do is bring. I think so. The live show, is at one level about cosmology and the questions it raises. Black holes, the study of the deep structure of nature. But actually, it's also about the human impact of those discoveries, the emotional impact. So about wider society. So actually, in the show, we have, as I said, we have classical music from Sibelius, Mahler. There are sort of literary and artistic references, because the thing is that questions such as, there's a question I posed at the start of the show, which is, what does it mean to live a finite, fragile life in an infinite, eternal universe? Which I think is the only interesting question, actually. And it's a question that is raised powerfully when you consider the size and scale of the universe. Mm-hmm. That's a question about the human experience of life, right? And if you think about everything, like you said, movies, music, art, for back hundreds or even thousands of years, most of it has been about that question. Mm. It's about dealing with what it means to be human. So I don't think there is any separation at all between anything that we could talk about, be it movies or literature or art or whatever, and science. They're not separate. They're all things that we do as humans to try to understand what it means to be human, ultimately, I think. So therefore, whatever you ask, it's about that, isn't it? It clearly is about that, I think.
Okay.
So, but now, so you want to know what movies I'm watching? I watched, what did I watch? The last movie I watched was on the plane here, and it was House of Gucci, because it was on.
Oh, okay, yeah.
On the thing, and I really enjoyed it, actually. I know it's had loads of criticism, but I just thought Jared Leto was incredible. I thought he lifted it, he changed that film into something else. I mean, Gaga was brilliant as well, but she's always fantastic. So I enjoyed that film. That was the last one that I watched.
Okay. I haven't seen that one. Is it nominated for any Oscars?
Ridley Scott, I think it is. It's, Ridley Scott, I don't think has made he's made some of the best films, in my view, ever made. I mean, Alien and Blade Runner, obviously. I love Gladiator. But also, even the things I would consider to be not so good, particularly Prometheus, which I was so annoyed about because it started so well. And then I think, if only you'd asked me to tell you, just let me direct this plot a tiny bit. And it was such a promising idea, and it went off the road. But even then, it's an enjoyable film, I think. So there you go. I'm a film critic now. But so I like Ridley Scott, and I like Lady Gaga and everything that she does. So, I would recommend House of Gucci. But
okay,
some people say it's too long, but there's no such thing as too long if you're on a transatlantic flight. There's only too short, actually. So, or Interstellar works well.
Another one. I hear the Batman's about 3 hours, so
I'll watch that on the way back.
Yeah. If you want to watch 3 more hours of Batman. Well, it's kind of interesting what you were just saying about like kind of everything coming back to science, because it's like the question, and it's sort of a universal thing that we all think about. And yet there seems to be, I don't want to say a pushback, but like some people just have a hard time getting into science. And I've never really understood that myself. It's like, how can you not be blown away when you hear about the scale of the universe and that kind of stuff, Yeah.
It's just a manifestation of our curiosity. That's all
right.
It is. With a very important caveat, which is really important, actually, which is one of my great heroes, Richard Feynman, wrote a great essay called The Value of Science in 1955, in which he reflected on what's the most valuable thing that the study of nature teaches us and how that can be used in other fields of human endeavour. And the most important thing, he said, was that nature very often tells you that you are wrong, right? So whatever your opinion is and however important you are, if your view of nature is wrong, then nature will ultimately tell you, and you have to accept it. So he said that scientists have a great deal of experience with being wrong, and it's a delightful experience because you've learned something. So the way you thought the world works turns out not to be, and so you know something and you've learned something, so you understand more. And so he called science a satisfactory philosophy of ignorance, which I think is a brilliant
like
definition.
Yeah.
And but his point was that you can take that delight in being wrong, the fact that you don't know, because obviously in order to do research, you have to first accept that you don't know, otherwise you wouldn't do research. That's the way that we have built our civilization. But you can take that idea and transplant it to other fields of endeavor, such as politics, for example. So imagine that our politicians started every speech by saying, well, of course, I could be wrong here. Of course, I don't know. It's really complicated. But the best of our ability at the moment, I think this is a way to go. And if we make some observations and it's not gone quite right, then we'll just change a bit and we'll fiddle around and we'll do something else. So we'll increase taxes or we'll decrease taxes or we'll change the way that we target environmental emissions or something, anything, whatever it is. Imagine if they said that, then we would live in a profoundly better world, right? Instead, what we have are a bunch of people who are certain. And the one, I don't get involved in politics so much, but the one piece of advice I always give people is if the person you're going to vote for sounds really sure, then do not vote for them.
Yeah.
They're not suitable, right? They're either dumb or disingenuous or some combination of the two, because they should know that it's really hard to run a country. In fact, Feynman said in that essay that democracy is a manifestation of that. It's the acceptance that we don't know how to run a country. So what we do is we change everything every 4 years. Why would you do that? If you think you know how to do it, you wouldn't do it, right? But of course, so the pendulum swings backwards and forwards. And that is, as Feynman said, and Oppenheimer said this as well, the great Robert Oppenheimer, that swing, when you see the swing, then what you're seeing is your freedom. Right? You're seeing the fact that this bunch of people thinks this and this, and we'll try them all. We'll try all these different ways. So it's the manifestation of your freedom when people vote, and it goes against you, and it goes towards you, and it goes against your beliefs, and it goes, and that's just great. The moment it stops doing that is the moment that you're no longer free. And we've made a big mistake, as Feynman said, because every time we think we know how to do it, then we make a mess of it. And you can see that in history, right? The more certain the leaders are, the bigger mess they make.
Seeing some of that in Europe right now.
Yep. Oh yeah, it's people who've forgotten that the road to wisdom begins with the statement, "I don't know." That's what and once you've forgotten that, you should not be running a country.
Yeah. No, I like that. It's funny, as I've gotten older, I've seen the pendulum swinging. So I've kind of become more of an observer and just kind of been like, oh, everything's going this way. No, wait. It always swings back the other way.
Sometimes
eventually.
we won't agree, and sometimes we'll agree. But that's democracy.
Yeah. You brought up Richard Feynman a lot here. And what's funny is I'm thinking about doing like a kind of a bio video on him or something, because he comes up all the time. Like he just kind of did everything.
Yeah.
And like influenced a lot of people.
Well, I mean, he was a truly great physicist, first thing to say. Nobel Prize, richly deserved for quantum electrodynamics. And if you want to know about physics and you're at the kind of undergraduate level, you should be looking at the Feynman lectures, because they're absolutely brilliant. But also, so I'm going to name drop now. So I did an event with Kip Thorne just a while ago. We did a conversation together, and Kip knew him very well and worked with him. And he said that so Feynman was always very dismissive of philosophy, for example, the philosophy of science. He said, what did he say? He said, I think it was Feynman who said that the philosophy is as useful to scientists as ornithology is to birds. I think that was Feynman. However, Kip said that he thinks that Feynman's book, The Character of Physical Law, is the best work of the philosophy of science ever written. And he said he said that to Feynman once. He took it into his office and said that, and Feynman threw him out of his office. but the thing about Feynman is that if you read The Value of Science, which you can just get online, right? You just like Feynman, The Value of Science, it comes up. It's the most beautifully written, eloquent, thoughtful piece of writing you could ever imagine. It's absolutely, it's profound and brilliant. And I think Feynman sort of played on this kind of idea that he was kind of a guy from Far Rockaway, New York, and he was kind of a bit tough, and the way that he lectured often was to, use that kind of slang, that language. He was very, very down to earth, right? But he was capable of writing this most tremendously deep and insightful prose, which he could do. So he's a very multifaceted individual, but first of all, a brilliant scientist.
Well, those are two different skill sets, being a brilliant academic and also being able to communicate that to like the masses. Which I would argue you are as well.
Thank you.
But you mentioned something earlier about kind of engaging people's emotions around science. And I wanted to touch on that a little bit because we are not logical creatures. We're emotional creatures. And there is sort of like a gap you've got to bridge between getting that hard logical science stuff into people's heads through an emotional sort of catalyst, I was just wondering if you could speak to that a little bit in terms of like how you do what you do.
It's because why did I become interested in astronomy? Because I had an emotional reaction to the night sky. That's what it was when I was younger, 5, 6, 7 years old. I just found it, a powerful, romantic, fascinating thing. And so I think at the heart of all science is just a desire to know, which is an emotional reaction. If you're a biologist, you might get fascinated by the way that the ants are making a path across your garden or something like that, but it's interesting, not because you're initially interested in the detail. You've just found something interesting that you want to understand. And so I think that at the heart of science, at the base of science, is an emotional, there's an emotional seed, which is that you are just interested and fascinated by something. And then again, Feynman had a saying for everything, right? Feynman,
it all comes back to Feynman,
said I don't even need to quote Feynman. I can do my version of it. So if you, I made a series years ago called Wonders of Life, which was a physicist view of biology. Really, it was inspired by a book that Schrödinger wrote. So Schrödinger's cat, Feynman, quantum mechanics, called What is Life, back in the 1940s, where he really laid the foundations for a lot of modern biology, in particular DNA. Right, it was and also bringing thermodynamics into biology. It's a very profound book. And so I made a series like that. And I realized that if you look at, for example, a blade of grass, right? So go out everyone can go outside now after listening to this and find a blade of grass. And actually, the whole history of life on Earth is written into that blade of grass. Right? We share a common ancestor with that blade of grass back... not actually hugely long ago, actually. The eukaryotic cells, whenever that was, let's say 2 billion years ago, maybe, but it's quite a long time. But, but certainly, there's a single origin to life, the last universal common ancestor called Luca, which is back there about 3.8 billion years ago, we think. So in what you should see there is an organism that's essentially 4-dimensional, right? The structure of it cannot be understood without understanding the history of a planet. And that's what science does for you. It makes it even more beautiful. So it's a beautiful thing in itself. But the more you know about how it got there and what it represents and its story, the more beautiful it becomes. So that's emotional.
Yeah.
It's an emotional reaction to the thing. So you should have an emotional reaction to a blade of grass because it encodes the history of a planet.
This podcast episode is brought to you by CuriosityStream. So I mentioned earlier that many people consider Brian Cox to be the heir apparent to David Attenborough as Britain's premier science communicator. Well, one of the people who believes that is, well, David Attenborough himself. And you can watch a lot of his programs on CuriosityStream. That includes Light on Earth, which is an award-winning documentary that explores the use of bioluminescence in nature. In other words, how plants and animals create light to communicate, to hunt, to mate. That's pretty much most of what plants and animals do, but that's along with some of the other documentaries he's made, like Ant Mountain, which explores the world of ants, Deep Ocean, which is about life miles below sea level, and Hot Tuna, which is not about a spicy tuna sandwich. It's about the Atlantic bluefin tuna, which is far more interesting than it sounds. His documentaries are famous for getting footage that's never been filmed before, so they're all groundbreaking in one way or another, and they are, of course, just a handful of the thousands of documentary films from some of the best filmmakers around the world on just about any topic you can possibly have an interest in. Science, art, engineering, history, you name it. Even better, when you sign up for CuriosityStream, you get free access to Nebula, the streaming platform where you can find all my YouTube videos, except totally ad-free, along with extended cuts and companion videos and original series like my Mysteries of the Human Body series. Nebula is basically a curated list of awesome, smart YouTube content, free of any algorithms or advertising. Seriously, most of the YouTubers that I follow are on there, and you can see their videos before they release them to YouTube. So yeah, it's a really cool service. And the best part is you can get Nebula and CuriosityStream for the ridiculously low price of $14.79 for an entire year. I did the math. It comes out to 62 cents per month per service, and you'll never run out of amazing content to watch. So yeah, to get all that, just go to curiositystream.com/JoeScottPod. Again, that's curiositystream.com/JoeScottPod. And you can start the process of wondering why the hell you waited so long to sign up for this thing in the first place. Because it's that good, I promise you. And because science says you have to hear something 3 times before you remember it, that's curiositystream.com/JoeScottPod. So go check it out. And thanks to CuriosityStream for supporting this podcast. Now back to Brian. The context, I feel that like that sort of understanding brings. I love what you just said, because I didn't really have a science background when I started my YouTube channel. It just kind of like became a science thing, just sort of an accident, which is great. But as I've been more in that world for a while and have more context around it, like you're right, I could just be walking down the street. You point out a blade of grass, but it could also be a tree. It could be a beetle walking down the street or something, and it's just like when you have that deep time context, it's just like, that's an amazing thing.
Yeah.
And I try to get that across to people. I feel like if I can share that, then I've done my job.
Sagan said it. There's a beautiful, I think it's in Billions and Billions. I can't remember which book it's in, but he writes about when he was a kid and he looked at the stars and he said, "What are those things?" And someone said to him, "They're just lights in the sky, kid." Right? And he thought, okay. So he went to a library. His mum took him to a library, and he got a book, and he found out that they were other worlds. Right? Suddenly, and he thought, "Well, there are other worlds." And now we know that they've all got planets, right? To a good approximation, all of them have planetary systems. So every point of light you see in the night sky has got planets. So there's a solar system there. Yeah. And then you can dream about those other worlds. Are they Earth-like? What are they like? Super Jupiter type things? What's up there? So the more you know, the moment you know they're not just lights in the sky, they're infinitely more magical. And that's true. It's always the case. That the more knowledge you acquire, the more magical something becomes. Yeah. That's not science. That's just emotion, right? That's just the way it is. It's interesting to know more.
Yeah. So that makes me want to talk about James Webb, because they just released sort of the first, not really the first image, but the first test image that's a real image that just came out the other day.
Galaxies, though.
You can see the galaxies
behind it. So it's not just the star with its points, and it's kind of interesting about the optics of the Webb, and it's all focused and it's cool, brilliant. But then you look in the background, and there are just countless. Yeah, I don't know how many there are in that image, but there's a lot. If you
it's like a mini deep field sort of in that one first image. The star that it was on, I was kind of like, okay, yeah, that's a star. And then they were saying it's 100 times less bright than what you could see from the human eye, and yet it's blowing out this picture.
Yeah,
I was like, oh my God, that's crazy.
Yeah, it's quite a machine, the Webb, and it's. It's got a lot of purposes, but one of them is that it can see into what's called the infrared, which is longer wavelengths. Right. And the reason we're interested in long wavelengths is because the light from very objects that were forming very early on in the history of the universe. So from which the light has taken well over 13 billion years to reach us. Those things, the light's been stretched by the expansion of the universe. And it's been stretched so much for the earliest stars that Hubble, which is our most powerful space telescope other than the Webb, can't see it because it's gone into the outside of its visual range. So the Webb is going to be able to see the formation of the first stars and galaxies, so it can see further back in time than the Hubble, into what we call the dawn, right? Just the edge of the cosmic dark ages before the dawn. So that's just one of the things. The other thing is it's powerful enough to look at planetary atmospheres beyond the solar system, exoplanets, to start looking at them really seriously, to say what's in them. Do they have the carbon dioxide or nitrogen? If you saw oxygen, high concentration, I doubt it, but if we did, you'd see photosynthesis in action, most likely. So you'd discover life.
So is that specifically what they're looking for most, is the oxygen, or are there other elements that would indicate maybe advanced civilizations or something like that?
Well, exactly. Someone said half jokingly to me once that imagine if we found CFCs, then something that can only be created by a civilization. I mean, I don't think anyone expects that. Imagine if you saw a heavily polluted atmosphere. someone had fucked the planet up.
Yeah.
It's like this would be the greatest discovery ever because you saw someone
they're just
who'd
like
made a
us.
complete mess of it. Yeah. So I don't expect that. I think that civilizations are extremely rare. That's my guess. But you never know.
So are you a rare Earth hypothesis kind of guy?
Rare civilization kind of guy. So I think that, we know that there are a lot of potentially Earth-like planets. I think the current estimate is of order 20 billion in the Milky Way. So maybe 1 in 20 stars or 1 in 10 stars, something like that. But that's potentially Earth-like. So rocky, the right distance from the star, possibly to have oceans on the surface if the atmosphere is right, and so on. And you might expect, and we don't know, but knowing what I know about biology and the history of life on Earth, you might expect some of them to have microbes on them. It doesn't seem so far-fetched, given that we know that life arose pretty quickly on the Earth when the conditions were right. There doesn't seem to be anything magical about the transition from geochemistry to biochemistry, which is what life is on a planet. But the history of life on Earth also tells you that from the origin of life, it took the best part of, or even a bit more than, 3 billion years to go from the origin of life and some single-celled things to complex multicellular life. And 3 billion years is a long time, even in astronomical terms. It's a quarter of the age of the universe.
Yeah.
And so that suggests, without knowing anything else, if you just have to guess, that suggests that the transition from single-cell living things to anything, something as complex as a blade of grass, never mind a human being, something that can build a civilization, is not as likely, right? Because it took... you think, so from the origin of life on Earth to the first industrial civilization on the planet is 4 billion years, right? 3.8 billion years. If you ask the question, how many of those potentially Earth-like planets are stable over that kind of timescale, then the answer might be very few. So it's in that sense that I think I'm a rare Earth person. I think that if I was forced to guess, with the additional bit of evidence that we haven't seen any evidence of anything. So there isn't any evidence of advanced civilizations out there currently. Then I think you put those seasons together and you think it's probably biology. I think the biology is the thing that stops it. There's a very good friend of mine actually in Manchester who's a professor of zoology, and he likes to say that all there will be there at best is slime.
Yeah. So
it's probably a slime-filled galaxy, if I was to guess. I'd love to be shown to be wrong. There's no reason why I shouldn't be wrong, though. No one would be less surprised than me if a flying saucer landed tomorrow, because I'd go, okay, well, that's fine. That solved a problem for me, because now I understand. Because it's a big mystery. It's like, why, with all this time and all those planets, does it seem that there's no big spacefaring civilization out there that's written its existence, the evidence of its existence across the sky? It's a problem. So I'd just I just tick it off and go, okay, that's good. I understand that fully.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't be surprised. People always have a go at me on on Twitter and things like that for going, you're closed-minded, you don't believe in the flying saucers, and I say,
yeah,
well,
I dipped into that a little bit.
I'm not closed-minded. I've thought about it very deeply, and it surprises me that there aren't any flying saucers, but I don't think we've seen any.
Yeah.
So I'm very open-minded about the subject, but I just don't. I've seen not one scrap of evidence from any reputable source that tells me that we've been visited by aliens. And when you play this on your YouTube channel, I will get another barrage of shit from line after line of nonsense on Twitter from people. And I'll just go, no, I just, you...
Yeah.
It's just
so you're echoing me a little bit, actually, because I did do a video when, you remember when they had that report that they were doing to Congress, the Pentagon had some UFO program.
Yeah.
So I did a video on that. And I was basically kind of what you were just saying. I was like, I would love more than anything else in the world for this to be true. It's just, it had the burden of proof is so high for this that a blurry image is just not going to do it for me. Sorry. Yeah. So and I got all the comments and all the emails and stuff.
You can see it with you talk about that the extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence.
Yeah.
So if you look at the search for life on Mars at the moment, so the Perseverance rover, it's got experiments on it. It's going around. It's taking cores. It's on its way to a river delta at the moment. It can drill. It can do chemistry and spectroscopy and all these things. But ultimately, every scientist I've spoken to on that mission said that even if we get signs that there's complex organics there, which we could gather from those instruments, the only way we will believe it is if we bring those samples back to Earth and we subject them to experiments with these huge facilities we've got here on Earth. And even then, it will probably take about 20 years before people accept it. Because if you look at there are structures called stromatolites on Earth, right, which are now accepted as the oldest evidence of living organisms on the planet. 3.8 billion years ago off the coast of Western Australia, for example. And those things were the subject of debate, even though we had them in our hands. For 20 years or more, people were arguing about whether they were evidence of life or not. So that's how hard you have to work when you've got small amounts of evidence from a long time ago in that case, or a different planet in terms of Mars. You've got to work very, very, very hard to show that you've not been misled. And that's we're going back to all the way to Feynman again, the satisfactory philosophy of ignorance. A lot of science is what's called, in my field, particle physics. It's about errors. It's about quantifying the errors in your observations. What are the possible sources of error? What are the, it's like if you toss a coin 10 times, it might come up heads 10 times. Doesn't mean the coin's weighted. There's a probability that will happen. So you've got to make sure that you understand the probabilities and things. When you're looking for life beyond Earth, remember that even looking for life on Earth, if you go back 3.5 billion years, has been tremendously controversial because it's hard to show. So it's short of, very clear evidence of a UFO literally landing in like Hyde Park or something, then I'd go, okay. Or some signal we could receive. We look for it. We've got this SETI, which is I strongly support. It's a really valuable scientific endeavor to go and listen. I mean, the first thing you want to do is look for evidence of civilizations out there. So we do. And we haven't found any. We found a couple of little blips, and they don't end up being repeatable. So then we try to look for them again. They've gone, like the famous wow signal. Right. So it's just the case that, there's an analogy I sometimes draw, which is that, we all get on aircraft, for example. Imagine getting on an aircraft. Imagine if they hadn't repeatedly tested it. Right, imagine if someone had gone, I think the wings should look a bit like this, stick them on, it'll be fine. then you know, imagine what that would be like, that experience. It's an example of how in certain things in engineering we take it for granted that someone's really careful, and it's good. When you build a bridge, you don't just go, "I'd be all right." You know, just like the Golden Gate Bridge, you know, just stick a few screws, it'll be fine.
Yeah,
you know, it's well tested. It's the same with knowledge, actually. So knowledge only becomes reliable knowledge when you test it. Like a bridge only becomes a reliable bridge when you test it. It's the same. So I encourage people to do that when they're just kind of guessing based on a fuzzy blob taken by someone on their 1990s phone. You know, just say, actually, imagine that the analogy is that this is an aircraft that I'm going to get on. And imagine if it's been subjected to an equivalent level of scrutiny. Maybe it's, you know.
Well, when you were talking a second ago about bringing samples back from Mars, I know that Perseverance is kind of doing that. It's collecting samples that are eventually, hopefully, going to be picked up and taken back. But even if you got that back home and they subjected it to the experiments and they found some kind of microbe or something, wouldn't you still have to prove that it didn't come from Earth to begin with?
Yep.
That would be another controversy, I imagine, or another big debate.
It's very possible. So we know that material is exchanged between Earth and Mars. We have Martian meteorites on the Earth. And we know that microbes can survive space travel. We know that they can exist in hostile environments like the International Space Station on the exterior, for example. So there's no reason at all, you're right, where there couldn't have been a single genesis on Earth or Mars, and that life could have been transferred just randomly because the planets exchange material. So you've got to show that it's a different biochemistry. It's very hard to do.
Yeah.
Especially because you might have things like stromatolites, which are not really life at all. They're the products of life, right? They're the structural evidence of life, potentially without the biochemistry. Because one of the ways you look for life on in a rock is you look for it's not really looking for just the elements, the molecules and things. It's looking for how they're distributed, because life tends to clump things together and distribute things in interesting ways. So layers or concentrations of things, that's what life does. So the key thing that Perseverance is not doing is grinding things up and putting them into a laboratory internally to see what's in there, because now it's much better understood, actually, that really part of the evidence for the life is how the structure of the rock has been modified by life. That's what we see on Earth. You see that's one of the key smoking guns, actually. So it's hard to show that life exists. We think it probably does, otherwise we wouldn't be looking for it. You know, that's the thing. So again, you know, when people say, "Oh, you're so close-minded, you don't believe in aliens," you go, "Well, actually, most people do think there's a chance of aliens. Otherwise, you wouldn't build Perseverance and send it to Mars, right?" Most people think there's a good chance that there might be Martians,
right?
But you know, as I said, it's extremely difficult to show that's the case, and there might not be as well. Don't know.
Can you clarify what stromatolites are exactly? I've heard the term before, but not.
They're found in Western Australia in particular. So they're now, I suppose, I don't know what the geologist had called them, but let's call them almost like the fossilized. They're not fossils, but they're structures that were created by microbes.
Okay.
So they're big. They're rock that has been arranged by life, right? Basically, that's a way to say it. Okay. But it took a long time to convince people that was the case. But they're some of the oldest evidence of life on Earth.
Yeah. Okay. Basically, you were talking about the Fermi paradox a minute ago about there's so many stars and everything. How come we don't see aliens everywhere? That was the video on my channel that got me started talking about science stuff. I was just doing comedy stuff, and then I did a video on the Fermi paradox just kind of randomly, and that was the first video. YouTube was like, "Hey, let's show this to some people," and that brought in some other people, and it became a sciencey kind of thing.
What were the jokes? What's the Fermi paradox joke?
Well, it wasn't really a comedy video. It was so long ago now. But everything before that was just kind of like, it was actually called Ask Joe in the beginning. Now it's called Answers with Joe. But I would get questions from people and I would just answer the questions. And that's what this was somebody asked a question on why don't we see aliens or something. So I did a video about the Fermi paradox. And there were probably some jokes in there, but I don't even remember what they were. It was a long time ago. But I actually did a video fairly recently that was sort of challenging the premise of contact, where, you know, we had this radio bubble that's gone out from our planet since, you know, for the last 100 years or so. And the idea that some alien civilization could have picked up on that. So I actually kind of sat down and was like, okay, so if it's about 100 light years out, because it's been about 100 years and it moves at the speed of light, you know, so how many stars that are, you know, sun-like in that area and everything. And I really kind of dug into it. And I came to the conclusion that there's nothing out there. I was curious what your opinion of that was.
Nothing in terms of civilization.
Right. Yeah. And in that small area.
Yeah. I mean, I think, yeah. I mean, in what sense? In the sense that we should have detected any civilization that was in such a bubble.
In the sense of that there's a civilization out there that could have hurt us inside that bubble.
Or could have hurt us.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there aren't many. You're right. There's a little thing online, isn't there, where you can just type in a bubble and it tells you how many Earth-like planets there are in that. I think you calculated it. Yeah, there aren't that many. It's true. There aren't that many stars. I don't know what the number is. I mean, it's a note. Do you remember in a 100 light year bubble?
I don't remember, but I want it was the number 90 or 91 or something like that is in my head. That seems like
it might be something like I can't. Off the top of my head, I don't know.
Yeah.
But
well, there's that picture though where you can see like a dot that is the radio bubble in the Milky Way, and it's just a dot. It's like
it's small. Yeah, I mean,
very
it's
small.
20 odd thousand light years to the center.
Yeah.
100,000 light years across or so, depending on how you measure it. Yeah. So
it
100
like
light
nothing.
years is nothing.
And plus it would get diffused so much by the time it got out 100, light years and whatnot. And anyway, I pointed to it.
Yeah, it's not a powerful signal.
Yeah.
True. Not many photons.
And at some point it might just blur into the rest of the background radiation and whatnot.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah, I agree.
Some people didn't like that. But
well, Contact is a great film.
It is a great film, yeah. There's another...
Because it was just trying to give you that sense, wasn't it, of going back in time as you go out and distance. Mm-hmm. It was a good way of showing distance, making that.
Well, and that was another thing about the Fermi paradox was the time factor. If the universe has been around for 14 billion years or something, and it took this long for us to show up, and we've only been sort of a blink of the eye in terms of the Earth years and stuff. Like how many civilizations might have come up and popped up and gone away in that time,
There's in the Drake equation, which is Frank Drake wrote down to try and, it wasn't to try to estimate the number of civilizations really, it was to try and focus your mind on what the variables are, how you should think about it. But at the end of that, the way that he wrote it, there's an L, the letter L, which is the length of time a civilization will be broadcasting or contactable through radio waves. And, you can set that. I mean, we've been around in that form, which is with radio telescopes. I like it that astronomers define civilization as when did you get a radio telescope? Then you're civilized. And, it's less than 100 years for us. So we've only been, that L for us is the contactable lifetime of civilization. It is, 100 years or so for us. And, we could have gone, if you think about the Cuban Missile Crisis, for example, we could that could have been 20 years for us, 50 years. We're still in that position where we could, how long is L? How long is the lifetime of civilization once it acquires nuclear weapons, for example, which it will? How long does your civilization manage that? It's not clear. We're doing the experiment, and we've dodged it a few times.
And the way you use resources and what that does to the environment and whatnot.
Climate challenge, all the things that you are inevitably challenged with as you industrialize. Oppenheimer thought about this a lot. because he, on the Manhattan Project, he'd felt himself responsible for creating the bomb. You can look at it many ways. You can say that he shortened the war in the Pacific, or you can say that he invented this thing that we don't have the wisdom to control. He felt the latter, I think. He was very worried about what he'd done. And, he was surprised. He just strongly felt, and he might still be right, that we didn't have the wisdom to control the knowledge that we've acquired through science. So it could be the case. So that could be another answer. So the great silence that people call the Fermi paradox, the fact there's nobody seems to be there, might just be because we are fundamentally idiots.
It's the great stupidity is
the great stupidity. All intelligent beings are fundamentally just dumb. Yeah. And the moment they work out how to do it, they erase themselves from the universe. That's actually a possibility. Which, and I challenge anyone who's listening to argue that there's at least a possibility that that's what we are.
It gets kind of, what's the word, nihilist or something, but when I think about, like, you have planet Earth and all the little things that kept it stable, and our magnetic field and the moon and all those things, all those little factors kept it the nice little warm little shell, and then the stuff starts growing on it. It's like mold, and then this other mold starts, like, just going out of control and like digging up too much stuff and ruining the whole thing. It's like it really almost feels like an infection.
I don't think so. I think
that's kind of a nihilist way of putting it, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's the way I look at life is that it's the most important phenomenon that exists in the universe. Without life, the universe is by definition meaningless. It's clearly meaning enters the universe with consciousness, and consciousness is a property of living things. And so without living things, there's no meaning. So I think that let's flip it round. If this is the only planet in the Milky Way galaxy that currently hosts an intelligent civilization, then it's the only island of meaning in a sea of 400 billion stars. And therefore, we have a tremendous responsibility, notwithstanding our physical insignificance, to protect this island of meaning. If we mess it up, we will be responsible, if that's the case, for annihilating meaning, perhaps forever, in a galaxy. So I think life's important.
You are a good counterbalance to me. I'm over here like, we're an infection that needs to be... No.
Well, think about it. I mean,
I love what you just said, though. That's good.
What's the point of an asteroid?
Yeah.
Right? It's just kind of... It's a lump of rock. There's nothing... It's pointless. I don't care. When people say, should we mine the asteroids? It's like, well, yeah. Because they're just lumps of rock.
What else are they doing?
Yeah, what are they doing there? There's no point. They're just there. Yeah. Floating around in space, waiting to be mined, I think. Life is a different thing. That's why we're careful, and rightly so, about exploring Mars, because there might be Martians, right? Not things with loads of legs and things, but microbes. But even so, if they've been there, if there's a separate genesis of life on Mars, then that's a tremendously valuable thing, and we should think about it very carefully. If there are no Martians... build cities on it.
Yeah. Why not?
Yeah. But if they're Martians, we need to be
That sort
careful.
of gets to the sort of that rare earth hypothesis thing I was talking about a second ago. Like, I guess there's two different ways of looking at it. One is that life is, I don't want to call it a fundamental force, but like a fundamental, just something that's going to happen with the chemistry of the universe. Like given enough time and the right conditions, it's just going to happen. And it might not even be like the life that we have here. It might be different kind of conditions, but it works in a different way, whatever. And the other way of putting it is that the universe is just this absurdly huge thing. and it just happened to some kind of weird fluke in this one spot that just happened to be the right conditions or something. Like, I guess those are two different ways of looking at it.
Well, I'm sure there's life out there and civilizations out there, because you rightly say, what was the word you used? Absurdly big.
It's absurdly
It is
big.
absurdly big. I mean, there are, the piece of the universe we can see, there are of order 2 trillion galaxies
Yeah.
in the observable universe, which is a small patch of a possibly infinite universe beyond. So there are definitely life and civilizations out there. There has to be. But the question really is, how many of them are contactable? How far away do you have to go? And it could be you have to go out of our galaxy to get another one. So I think that's the real question. It's internal to our galaxy, because I don't see we're ever going to be contacting things from another galaxy. I just think the distances are too big. So it's practically, it's almost irrelevant.
Right.
But inside our galaxy, 400 billion stars, then that's the question. What is there in there?
Well, didn't we find on some comets like organic molecules?
Yeah.
Or organic compounds?
Oh, carbon chemistry, yeah. Complicated. It gets complicated.
Right.
Everywhere.
Yeah. So that was interesting to me, because it's like, I mean, you can see on Earth with the tides and the little, tide pools and stuff, and over time and the bubbles, all that whole theory. But like out in space, in the dust clouds and stuff, to be able to get the basic building blocks of life to happen, to me that kind of sounds like you could see a lot more of it out there if the basic building blocks are that easy to create and so prevalent.
But you've got to, if you think about it, you've got to somehow those building blocks have got to come together to encode information and copy it.
Yeah.
That becomes a bigger ask, and that requires metabolism. It requires energy. There's thermodynamics. There's fundamental things you need to compute, right? It's running software essentially. So that's a bit different from a few amino acids floating around. It's like, how do they end up running software, copying data? And I think that's the great mystery that we don't understand.
Do you think it's possible there could have been a second, I guess the word is biogenesis, of life on Earth?
I don't know.
Or did
I mean,
it all come from one?
I do ask biologists that, and sometimes people will say it's true that every living thing we are aware of, everything that we're aware of, shares the same biochemistry at the fundamental level, same DNA coding or RNA, even viruses, right? That broadly speaking, you can see it's common. But there are people who think of a so-called shadow biosphere where there might be some other kinds of life that perhaps are quite rare that we haven't detected. Perhaps the way we search for life wouldn't detect it as life. I think that's on the fringes. But there are serious people who think about that, and it becomes relevant when you're looking for life on Mars, because it would potentially be different biology. Right. So you can't just test. You can't just, obviously with COVID, we're all used to those kind of tests, what we call them in the UK, the lateral flow test, the COVID test and things. That's all, they're looking for biology. They're looking for the particular things, particular gene sequences or whatever it is. And so you've got a completely different biochemistry, then it's not obvious how you'd look for it. So there are people who think about that. But,
Yeah. There's actually, teasing up a video a little bit here, but there's a project that I've been working on where it's very different from most of my normal videos, but the idea is the entire history of the Earth in 10 minutes, proportional,
Yeah.
And it's funny because I've got some writers that work with me, and one of them was working on it. He was like, and I was like, the point is that it would, unicellular life would probably begin, early on, but then multicellular wouldn't be till like way later. You kind of touched on that a second ago, but but he was like, well, there's not a whole lot really happening between like minute 2 and minute 6 or something. And I was like, that's the point. Like, this should be the most boring video in the world. It's just literally sitting there waiting for this thing. And but that gets the point across that, like, for some reason, that jump from basic life to complex life, it just took a really long time.
I mean, there were some things going, photosynthesis, complex things going on in the single-celled organisms. But you're right, the origin of the so-called eukaryotic cell, which is the nucleus and everything, which is
Right.
necessary for complex multicellular things. That's shrouded in mystery, I think, and happened quite late.
Could you consider that a great filter?
This is a
For
good
life?
question. The great filters I touched on this in the live shows, actually, that where is the great filter? Given that, let's assume that we are the only civilization around, is the filter in our past or our future?
Right.
So if it's in the past, as you said, it could be, the origin of multicellular life. So single cell life, fine. Multicellular organisms, not fine. So we've gone through the great filter. We're very lucky. We've made it through, and here we go. And our future is out there amongst the stars. Or, as we spoke about, the filter could be in our future. So it's very difficult for civilizations to go through the industrialization process. And they just don't.
Mm-hmm.
So there were lots of them, and they all stopped about now, basically, which is also a possibility. So obviously we hope the filter's in the past, and we came through it. But
then there's all those like sci-fi concepts of like, oh no, there's a predator species out there wiping out everybody that they find, and that whole thing.
Yeah, that'd be cool, wouldn't it? At least we'd know then.
Hey,
If
as that
Predator
giant
came.
laser beam is wiping
There
us
it is.
out. Hey, there's aliens. All right.
Yeah, excellent. I'd be going, oh, brilliant. That's
We
great.
finally got the answer.
Yeah.
Well, we're just coming up on an hour here. I wanted to kind of ask a few little, just sort of trite questions, just because I got you here. And I would
You
love
never
to hear
know,
your answers to
though.
them.
I might end up going off on a
That'd be
long
great.
and complex scientific answer to the trite
I love
question.
it. That's why you're here. So we kind of talk about like James Webb and the kind of things that it could find, and that's all exciting and everything. If there was one scientific mystery, and it could be dark matter or any of the things that we just talked about or whatever, but like if there was one mystery that you would like to see solved more than anything else, if you could pick one,
I would pick, at the moment, the thing that I'm working on, so in some sense professionally, is with a half a PhD student shared with someone, but also writing a book. It concerns black holes, and it concerns a very simple question that Stephen Hawking initially triggered and asked, which is what happens to the information contained in something that falls into a black hole. Does it disappear from the universe forever? Or when the black hole has evaporated away, which is Stephen's first great contribution to physics, was to show that black holes have a temperature and evaporate, emitting something called
Hawking radiation. Right? Yeah.
And so ultimately the black hole will be gone, and all that will be left is Hawking radiation. And there are very profound questions. His initial calculation suggested that the radiation is what's called thermal, which means technically that it contains no information at all about anything that fell in. If you burn a book, put it this way, very 2022, right? So if you burn a book, then in principle, if you collect all the ashes and all the gas and everything from the book, in principle, you could reconstruct the book. So the information has not been destroyed. It's still contained in the radiation and the ashes that have left. But the problem with black holes, according to Stephen's initial calculation, and really naively, according to the production process, the production mechanism is they radiate because they disrupt. So the vacuum, the so-called quantum vacuum, empty space, is really disrupted by the presence of an event horizon. So it's one way you can think about it. So really, the radiation is really a property of the event horizon. But if you throw a book into a black hole, then it goes across the event horizon without drama, according to Einstein, free falls in, and ultimately meets the end of time, the singularity in the middle of the black hole. Well, not in the middle, it's in the future. You have to be careful with relativity, right? So the singularity is a moment in time. So it goes to the end of time, let's put it that way. So it's kind of gone. From the perspective of the book, it went to the end of time. But the radiation is being produced independently of the book, right? No, it's not like being setting on fire. And yet, everything we know about physics suggests that the information should be preserved. So you shouldn't destroy information in any physical process in the universe. So a great challenge raised in the 70s and 80s, which has been solved, I would say, in the last 2 or 3 years to an extent, is that challenge. Does the information get destroyed? We think it doesn't. We think it comes out and it's encoded in the Hawking radiation. But that's leading us to a very profound reassessment of the nature of space and time and what they are. So we're now strongly of the view, I think most people, that space and time emerge from a deeper theory, which is quantum mechanics ultimately, which doesn't have space and time in it. So but that's all coming from the study of the very simple question of does something that goes into a black hole come out basically again in the future. And so that's quantum gravity. And we need quantum gravity to understand, if we're ever going to speak with any authority about the origin of the universe, if it had one, or to understand what was happening very close to the Big Bang or before the Big Bang, whichever way you want to look at it, then we need that theory. So I'd like to know what that theory is. And part of that's just because I'm so interested in black holes that, I'm fascinated in the developments that are. I mean, it's really weird. Just to give you a flavour, not only now are we sure, pretty sure, I think everyone's pretty convinced that the black hole evolution does not destroy information. But if you say, well, how is it encoded in the Hawking radiation in the far future? It's encoded redundantly, it turns out. So in a manner that seems to be similar to the way that we encode information in quantum computers in order to prevent errors in the memory of quantum computers, called the quantum error correcting code. So it seems that there's put it this way, it seems like the fundamental view of the universe, the fundamentals of the universe are information theoretic rather than physical. John Wheeler, great physicist, said way back decades ago, he had this thing called it from bit, which is the reality comes from bits. It's all bits, or qubits, quantum bits. Yeah. And that does seem to be the lesson from the study of black holes.
Huh. I think I covered the holographic principle. Does that have something to do with the encoding? It's the same thing. Yeah.
So what that's saying is that the theory that you can write the gravitational theory, so the theory of our world, right, the general relativity and so on, you can write it completely in terms of a theory encoded on the boundary surrounding the space.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
So that's the holographic principle. That's a hologram, which is that you can encode a 3D object in a 2D piece of film completely. Yeah. So it does seem that there's at least a dual description of our universe on a surface somehow surrounding the universe. Whatever that means, it's very vague because people don't really understand what that means. It was first done in what's called ADS space, which does have a well-defined boundary, and now it's not. Yeah. And so, but it, broadly speaking, it comes from. There's one way of describing it, which comes way back. The hints of it were way back with Jacob Bekenstein, who worked with Hawking a long time ago, and he was Wheeler's student actually, and he long ago in the 70s realized that the information, how much information is contained in a black hole. Ask that question, and it's equal to up to a factor of a quarter. But we can forget the quarter. It was a misdefinition of something. So let's say it's equal to the surface area of the event horizon measured in square Planck units. So a Planck unit is a fundamental length scale in the universe. Right. So for some reason, the information content of a black hole is proportional to the surface area of the event horizon. And you can imagine that's like saying, how much information can you fit into a library? Well, you would think it was to do with the volume of the library. How many books can you fit inside the library? But it turns out that it's as if you can only paper the walls of the library with the pages of the books. It's almost as if the interior doesn't exist in some description. And that's, again, what black holes have been pointing us towards. It's very weird that would be the case. There's a fundamental link between the surface area of a space and the information content it is capable of storing. That's quantum gravity, in action, somehow. Nobody knows how, but it's quantum gravity.
This is where my brain does start to melt a little.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, a lot.
This is the most difficult stuff. It's funny because when you hear the experts talk about it, and I've talked to some of the real experts, and they're often reluctant to put it into words because it's quite well defined mathematically. There's a thing called the ADS-CFT correspondence. You might have heard of Maldacena and those people. But actually, what it actually means, what the interpretation is not agreed upon. And so many of the real experts in the field, sort of rightly, I think, shy away from attempting to... You'll hear people talk about wormholes connecting the interior of the black hole to the Hawking radiation in the far future, things like that. But actually, when you try and pin people down, they're not. It's more like they look like wormholes in the maths, but it's not clear what that does. It really mean there's a wormholes opening up? Does it mean that?
Where does it go?
Yeah. So it's. I think this is the cutting edge, but it's fascinating. What everyone agrees upon is that we're getting a glimpse of a deeper structure of space and time. Everyone agrees on that. So there's something else below it, and below time, underneath this thing we call time and space. There's something else. There's a great analogy actually. It's really similar when I look at the history. If you go back to the 19th century in thermodynamics, which is the study of temperature and pressure and volume and entropy, these things, what they were telling us, although we didn't know it initially, was that matter is made of smaller building blocks. So they were actually telling us that there is a statistical theory of small things underlying these things that we measure, temperature, and we can calculate, like entropy, things like that. People wanted to do it to build better steam engines, so that's what they were doing. But it was telling us about atoms and molecules, but we didn't know that. And it's actually only till the late 19th, early 20th century when you see that connection is made. So it was a signal there was something below, some deeper structure. And now we have the temperature of a black hole, the entropy of a black hole, the laws of thermodynamics for black holes. And what they're really telling us, I think, is that gravity is a statistical theory. So space-time is made of something else. So we're seeing the average behavior of something else, and we're calling that gravity and space and time, in the same way that we call the average motion of molecules temperature and entropy and so on.
So those are basically just like how we experience this deeper thing.
Yeah, so we're approximating.
Yeah,
but it's what we do in our lives. We don't think about atoms. We think there's a glass of water here, so we say, what's the temperature of it? Temperature is not a fundamental thing. It's a thing that tells us about it's a parameter that tells us how the molecules are distributed amongst the available energy levels, which is quantum mechanics, in this structure. So it's telling us about the distribution of energy in the structure and the structure itself, and how many different levels of energy it can have, all sorts of stuff, which is deep underground, so hidden quantum mechanics in here. But ultimately out of it comes this thing, temperature. Also, you can interpret it as the average energy of the things moving around. So it's got different interpretations, but it's basically telling us there's a substructure. That's what it is. So yeah, so that's where we are with black holes. So there's a very long answer to a short question. Next.
Next.
Next trivial question.
I've had this sort of theory, kind of just talking about time and sort of time and space-time and whatnot. Like, we know that space-time is expanding, the universe is expanding, dark energy and all that. Could that expansion, since time is connected to space, be the expansion of time, kind of be like the forward movement of time? Is that what's causing time to move forward, is the expansion of space? Does that make any sense? I've had this theory for a while. I've never talked to somebody smart enough to tell me how bad it is.
There's a thing called the thermodynamic arrow of time, which is really the statement that the asymmetry between the past and the future in the universe is to do with the special state of the Big Bang. So Sean Carroll, I don't know if you had Sean on the show, but he has a really nice analogy where he says that it's like there's no up and down in space, right? But if you put a big thing there like the Earth, then there's an up and down. You break the symmetry, right? It's the same with time. So in one way of thinking about time is that because of this special configuration in the past, that determines the difference between the past and the future. But I've not seen anyone say that relate dark energy to that. You probably could somehow in a thermodynamic kind of argument. But I don't see anyone try to make that. I haven't thought about it. But yeah, but then that's very different. That's our experience of time.
Right.
The thermodynamic arrow. That's different from the quantum gravity question. It's probably related actually, but it's in principle at the moment different to what it is. To saying what is time. So the answer is we don't know what time is. Right? It seems to be coming from quantum entanglement ultimately, but I'll leave it there because that seems to be what the law. That seems to be where we're being pointed by black holes. It's something to do with quantum information entanglement. That the entanglement's a way of distributing information across large systems, basically. So it's something to do with that, probably. And everyone just waves their hands. It's not pinned down yet.
Well, my brain has been sufficiently melted, so I think it's probably time to go ahead and wrap this up. But where can I point people to find out information about the tour and where to go and stuff?
briancoxlive.co.uk.
Okay.
So, and all the things are there, and all the things we talked about are in there, actually. So amazingly, I try and cram this into a couple of hours with a load of graphics and music and a bit of comedy, but it is all in there.
Cool.
So,
I just happened to touch on all the same things that you're already doing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Look at me.
Which is great. So I'll see you in Dallas.
I would love to come see it. Yeah.
Yeah.
23rd of June, I believe.
Yeah.
Actually, we're heading out of town soon after that.
We're in Austin and Houston as well, down in Texas. And we're all over the place, actually.
Well, you missed all the tornadoes yesterday, so that's good.
Yeah. Was it okay? I heard that was quite
It got pretty touchy for a while. We have a little crawl space under our stairwell, and we had to pull some stuff out of there to make some room just in case. But I still need to go put it all back. But no, we wound up okay.
It's one of the
west of here. It's kind of bad.
One of the few advantages of living somewhere, living in. I mean, it's not the few advantages. The UK is a great place to live, but one of the advantages is that we always moan about the weather, but we don't really have very much bad weather. It's usually okay. It just means it's raining a lot. I mean, we have we've had some big storms, but they're not like the things that you get.
You're talking about the UK?
They're a bit lower level, almost always. The storms.
No, I've been over there and it was just raining, and I'm like, it just rains here.
Drizzles.
It's not. There's no thunder. There's no lightning. There's no swirling. Yeah.
No.
Maybe that's why the buildings last for 1,000 years over there.
Yeah, there was. Well, no, it's because we built them. We were building. Well, actually, I don't know. Actually, there aren't many 1,000-year-old buildings. Actually, are there? You have to go to the pyramids and things, don't you? Stonehenge, I suppose. But Stonehenge hasn't lasted well.
Well, they're definitely older than the things here. I remember I went to a pub in London, and it was older than my country, and I was like, wow, okay, you don't get a lot of those in Dallas.
It's true.
Dallas is like, it was built in the 50s. This is a historical marker. It's like, okay.
It's true.
It's a different place.
But there was something on Twitter. I can't remember what it was, but it was about being English, and it was basically being English. You're just looking out the window, saying, well, "It wasn't supposed to rain today." That's what being English is.
Just day after day of
it wasn't supposed to rain.
Well, here it's like it's sunny, and then it rains, and then it storms, and then it's sunny again, and it'll go from like 80 degrees, and then 3 hours later it's 40 degrees.
That happened to me. I was in Austin earlier in the year, and that happened to me. It was really warm, and then it wasn't.
Humid.
Yeah, and then it suddenly wasn't.
Yeah.
It's like, what happened? It was literally mid-afternoon. Yeah.
I think we've got this weird combination of we're right by the coast, but there's also mountains to the west of us and plains between us and Canada. So it's just like this weird mix of airflow and stuff. But
yeah.
I'm not a weatherman, so I don't know.
No. Yeah, we're just in Britain. We're just in the sea, surrounded by sea. It's all just nice and wet.
Yeah,
Anyway.
I like it there. I need to go back. It's been too long. Well, this has been an honor. I've been watching you for years, and it's been really cool to get to talk to you, and I appreciate you doing this.
No, thank you. It's a real pleasure.
And good luck with the tour.
Thank you very much.
Okay, that was awesome. Big thanks to Brian Cox for sharing his time with me. I really enjoyed this, and it's cool to talk to somebody who really understands the science to like an excruciating level, but can talk about it in ways that are in no way excruciating. I mean, he can make it fun and relevant. You can just see that he has a passion for this stuff. It just oozes from his pores. It's a very disgusting way of putting it, but you get the idea. So go check out the schedule for his Horizons tour this summer. Like I said, he's coming to 50 cities, so chances are there's a show that's near you. I'll put the link in the show notes, or you can just check out briancoxlive.co.uk. This episode was produced by Kimmy Britt, edited by Bray Brown. I'm Joe Scott. You can find me at Answers with Joe pretty much everywhere on the socials. Of course, my YouTube channel is Answers with Joe. Anyway, thanks a lot for listening. Please do share this if you thought this was interesting, and a nice review on whatever podcast player you're using right now really does go a long way. But until next time, thanks. Have a good one. Now go out there and start some conversations of your own. Take care.